The first impact is the smell. The leather of the saddles and harnesses, the smoke of the campfires, the sweat of the animals and the dust heated by the sun. Then you hear it, the deafening rhythm of 1,000 feet on dry earth, the clanging of bells on camels' necks, and the echo of voices in languages you've never heard before. We are crossing the Silk Road and you are our guest. To bring this lost world to life, we use artificial intelligence to reconstruct environments, faces and sounds from real historical records. What you see is not fantasy. It's the past brought back to life. The Silk Road pulsed for 1,000 years. It has survived collapsing empires, suffocating deserts and devastating plagues. But what drove it all? Were they ambitious emperors or obsessed merchants? Why face so many dangers? Why did so many men exchange their lives for these paths? And where did these roads lead? The answers lie in the dust. Welcome to the real Silk Road. The Silk Road was not born out of a project. It was not created by an emperor. It was driven by the most visceral force in human history, the quest for profit, and this path was repeated several times, solidifying, expanding, and proving its efficiency. In Rome, a single metre of Chinese silk was worth a soldier's entire month's salary. The nobles wanted it and couldn't replicate it. China kept the secret of silk with the death penalty for anyone who revealed it, and it was the only place in the world where the fabric existed. With coffers full and the secret out of reach, the Romans simply paid whatever they asked for. Between the two empires lay 8,000 kilometres of unforgiving deserts and icy steppes. And in between, a price difference so absurd that no merchant could ignore it. Supply is low and demand is high. Profit is inevitable. There will always be someone willing to cross the world to take advantage of it. The route was in fact a choreography of hands. Goods didn't travel in the hands of a single merchant. They were passed around. Each oasis was a trading counter. Each caravan a slice of profit. Silk changed owners dozens of times, absorbing the sweat and ambition of each merchant, until its final price was as high as the risk of searching for it. On the sidelines, the empires watched, not to block but to harvest. They didn't build walls, they built customs houses. Governing a city on the route was first and foremost an extraordinarily lucrative business. Tolls, fees, passage taxes. The wealth that fed palaces came from the dust of the caravans. Silk gave its name to the route because it was the most lucrative product in the ancient world, and therefore the one that most ignited the ambition of the merchants. But what circulated along these routes was much more than fabric. The system encompassed everything that was unknown and rare to the civilizations at the opposite ends. From China came silk, paper and gunpowder, inventions that the West had yet to imagine. From Persia came carpets, worked glass and raw turquoise. From India, spices such as pepper, cinnamon and cardamom. From the Mediterranean, wine, olive oil and gold coins. Each end of the route exported what it had most precious and imported what it wanted most. A caravan wasn't just a group of men and animals moving through the desert. It was a city on the move. There could be up to 1,000 loaded camels, hundreds of men, horses, mules, guard dogs and hired soldiers. Each animal carried between 150 and 200 kilos of goods, all tied up, balanced and calculated to the gram. Behind all this was a people that history has almost forgotten, the Sogdians. They came from Central Asia, from the region we now call Uzbekistan. No army, no empire, no borders to defend. And yet they were the ones who made the system work. When a caravan set off, the Sogdians took up their duties. The guide who knew the way to each oasis, knew every pitfall of the terrain and every variation of the wind in the Taklamakan desert. The interpreter who sat between a Chinese merchant and a Persian nobleman, transforming incomprehensible languages into closed deals. The money changer who converted currencies from empires that didn't even know each other, calculating rates off the top of his head while the caravan was still moving. They weren't just carrying goods. They were carrying knowledge, without which the route would simply stop. The importance of the Sogdian people was not only in the roads and the caravans. A caravan travelled between 30 and 40 kilometres a day because men and animals had limits. The camels had to rest, the goods had to be checked, and the provisions, especially the water, had to be replenished. These warehouses were called Caravanserais. Literally, mansion for caravans, they were stopping points built along the route, as if they were links in a chain which kept the flow alive. Caravanserais were built by rulers and empires, but within their walls, it was often the Sogdians who were chosen to operate. Their colonies settled there, turning each caravanserai into a permanent commercial office. They stored goods, negotiated prices, collected taxes for the local ruler, hired guides for the next leg of the journey, and brokered every transaction that crossed those gates. The gold-free transaction was an important milestone for the security of the route. A Persian merchant would arrive in Chang'an to buy silk, and instead of carrying gold for thousands of kilometres, he would present a document issued by a Sogdian in Samarkand, a credit record. Then, when he arrived in Chang'an, one of the Sogdian's relatives would recognise the paper, hand over the goods, and the debt would be settled between the family. The dangers of robbery along the way were fateful and abundant. The bandits knew the routes as well as the merchants. They knew where the terrain favoured an ambush and where the men would be most tired. The larger caravans hired armed protection, but the smaller ones ran the risk. Many of them disappeared without a trace. Nature also took its toll. In the Pamir and Tian Shan mountain passes, the cold killed animals during the night without warning. The altitude disoriented men used to the desert. Narrow passages between stone walls were unforgiving of miscalculations. And in the stretches between the oases, it was days of marching on arid and exposed terrain. Losing your way meant certain death. There was no help. There were no signs. There was only the sand, the sun, and the distance to the next point of water. The Silk Road was a road to fortune, but it took its toll every kilometre. The Silk Road was a network, a complex system of land and sea routes that branched, converged and adapted over centuries. And like any network, there were points where the flow converged, usually the reference cities that every merchant knew, the busiest points and where the greatest volume of goods passed through. The main land artery ran from Chang'an, today's Xi'an in central China. It was the largest city in the world at the time, with around 1 million inhabitants, and the natural exit point for everything China produced. From there, the caravans went on to Dunhuang, the last city before Taklamakan. One of the most hostile deserts on the planet, constantly moving dunes, no water, no vegetation, with temperature variations of up to 50 degrees between day and night. The name in ancient Turkish means that from which one does not return. Caravans didn't cross it, they went around it. From the north, through the oases of Turpan and Kuka, and along the Tian Shan mountains. From the south, through the oases of Hotan and Shashe, along the Kunlun mountains. 2 different routes that converged at the same point, the city of Kashgar, still in Chinese territory. Kashgar functioned as the first major node on the route. It was where the 2 routes of the Taklamakan met again, where Chinese merchants crossed with caravans from Central Asia, and where the route faced its next obstacle, the Pamir. A mountain range of extreme altitude, narrow passes and permanent cold, responsible for most of the human and animal casualties of the entire crossing. It was the section of the route that left Chinese territory and crossed what is now the regions of Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, until it reached the city of Samarkand in Uzbekistan. Samarkand was the central node of the entire overland route. It was the meeting point where everything arrived, was reorganised and moved on to wherever there was demand. It was where the greatest volume of goods and the most money changed hands. From there, the route continued west, through through what is now called Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and finally Turkey, Istanbul, the famous Constantinople. Parallel to this land artery was the sea route. Ships left Guangzhou, crossed the South China Sea, passed through the Straits of Malacca, crossed the Bay of Bengal, and anchored in the northwest of Sri Lanka, the central redistribution point of the Indian Ocean. From there, the ships would follow the west coast of India, towards the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. Those arriving via the Persian Gulf connected to the land route at Basra. Those arriving via the Red Sea would disembark in Alexandria and enter the Mediterranean. The sea route existed for practical reasons. Heavy and bulky goods were unfeasible on the land route. Transportation by sea was cheaper and could handle larger quantities. The risk was seasonal storms and piracy. The choice between land and sea depended on 4 variables: the type of merchandise, the political stability of the available routes, the time of year, and the accumulated cost of tolls along the way. The route had no fixed destination. It was a system in permanent motion, and as long as there was profit on the horizon, it would find its way. 3 great empires divided control of the main artery between them, each dominating a strategic stretch. In the east, the Tang dynasty held the starting point, controlling the flow of everything leaving or entering China. In the centre, the Sassanid Empire dominated the Persian section, the corridor through which practically all the goods on the route had to pass. In the west, the Byzantine Empire controlled the gateway to the Mediterranean, Anatolia and Constantinople, where the silk arrived before heading to Rome and beyond. These empires didn't build the route, but they quickly learned how to profit from it. Tolls, entry fees, taxes on the volume transported. The busier the route, the richer the empire. Governing a city on the caravan route was, above all, an inexhaustible source of revenue. Security on the route wasn't free, it was a service. Merchants paid taxes and received in return the guarantee, or at least the expectation, of arriving at the next point alive and with their goods intact. It was a silent interdependence. The empire charged, the merchant paid, and the route flowed. In the 13th century, a man from the steppes of Mongolia did what no emperor had ever done before. He unified Asia by force. Genghis Khan conquered the Silk Road. One by one, the cities fell: Samarkand, Merv, Nishapur. Empires that had existed for centuries disappeared within years. What looked like total destruction was, in practice, a brutal reorganization. For the first time in history, the 3 sections of the route, Eastern, Central and Western, were under a single authority. A single law, a single protection system. The result was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. A period in which a merchant could leave Chang'an and reach Constantinople without crossing a single hostile border, without changing protectors at every turn, without negotiating passage with rival empires. And the route responded. The volume of goods increased. Speed increased. Merchants who had previously limited their journeys to known stretches began to risk greater distances. New goods entered the flow. New towns grew up along the routes. The Silk Route reached its peak, longer, faster and richer than it had ever been. The Mongol Empire had done what no visionary, no emperor and no merchant had ever managed: transform a web of fragmented paths into a single, continuous, pulsating artery, from one end of the continent to the other. Now, look at the paradox. The Pax Mongolica had created the most efficient artery the world had ever seen. Goods moved fast in great volume over immense distances, but there was one passenger that no one saw boarding, and this passenger travelled even faster than silk. The Black Death entered the route along the same paths as the caravans. It jumped from oasis to oasis, from caravanserai to caravanserai, from city to city. Samarkand, Merv, the major cities along the route were devastated. Entire populations disappeared within months. The flow that had fed empires for centuries simply stopped. And then the Mongol Empire collapsed. The route that had functioned as a single artery began to bleed again, at the same points as before. But this time there was something different on the horizon. In 1498, the Portuguese reached India via the Cape of Good Hope, bypassing the African continent and opening up a direct sea route between Europe and the spices of the East. There were no more tolls, no more hostile borders, no more long chains of hands that made every commodity more expensive. What used to take months by land now arrived directly across the oceans. European merchants quickly abandoned the land route. The flow that had sustained entire cities dried up. Cities that had lived off the caravan movement slowly withered away, losing population, wealth, and relevance. Some became ruins. Others disappeared completely under the sand. The Silk Route didn't die all at once. It was abandoned stretch by stretch until the last merchant passed and didn't return. The Silk Road has come to an end. But what it set in motion never stopped. The world we inhabit today has been shaped by those paths of dust in ways we rarely realise. The religions that guide billions of people travelled the route before they got to where they are today. The technologies that transformed civilizations, paper, gunpowder, the compass, crossed those deserts and mountain passes before changing the Western world. It was life pulsing through an artery. It was the smell of leather from the saddles and harnesses, the smoke from the fires, the sweat of the animals and the dust heated by the sun. It was a whole world in motion, and it lasted 1,000 years. Thank you for crossing the Silk Road with us. I invite you to subscribe to our channel and comment on the next video you'd like to see recreated.